and the ability to serve some folks in Hendry as well, but most of our efforts really are focused on Lee County. That's not to say, though, that we don't receive calls quite frequently from particularly adult children whose parents live here, and maybe the adult child lives in a different area of the country. They often will call in with concerns about their parents and questions and that sort of thing.
So how can you help an adult child if they're calling you from Pittsburgh, let's say, because they have a mom or dad that has dementia that lives in the Fort Myers area, and they're concerned about their parents, but they're all the way up north in another state? How can you help that adult child?
One of the ways that I think we're most helpful is initially just offering education to the family on a whole, kind of explaining what may be happening and the challenges that they may be facing. But also, because we do offer visits within families' homes, we will frequently try to contact the caregiver who's local, talk about the situation, see if they're open to us coming to speak with them individually within their home, and kind of assessing the situation and seeing what services here locally can we offer or can we connect them with that will help them maintain their independence as well as address any of the issues that the adult child is worried about.
So you actually make home visits, Jessica?
We do. Mm-hmm.
And when you go into the home to do an assessment, what does that entail?
It really depends on why we're there. And why I say that is some of our visits are more educational in nature, where we're talking just about the disease process. We're assessing the person maybe with a memory screening like the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, maybe referring them to other providers here in the area, talking about safety concerns. But we also sometimes do receive more crisis-based calls. Those might be calls from the local law enforcement or from Adult Protective Services. We frequently receive calls from neighbors, and those calls are usually when the primary caregiver has become ill or had a fall or something has happened, where the primary caregiver is at least temporarily out of the picture. The person with memory issues is kind of left on their own sometimes, and we're trying to help pick up the pieces and figure out how can we maintain that person's safety while we help to develop a more long-term plan.
So you can help long-term planning, but in a crisis situation, you're there to figure it all out, because we know just from experience a lot of times caregivers might procrastinate in making a long-range plan for whatever reason, and all of a sudden they find themselves in a crisis, and then, they have nowhere to turn, and they haven't made any plans, and that's where someone like you, a social worker, could step in.
Yes. And what we frequently will do is at least try to get something in place kind of on an immediate basis so that the person's not left alone while we work with maybe out-of-state family or friends to develop a different network of care for whatever extended period it may be. We are lucky here at the Dubin Center that we frequently receive gifts and we are awarded grants and that sort of thing to assist us in our fundraising endeavors. And so we always ask folks, be it a crisis or if they just need a respite stay and maybe it's something the family can't afford, go ahead and call us first, because if we have the money, we'll certainly use it for that.
So that leads me to ask you this question. Are your services free to the caregivers?
They are. We are very lucky and proud to be a United Way partner agency. And because of that partnership, in large part, all of our services for family caregivers are always free. Also, we don't operate with any state or federal funding. And the good side about that is we don't have to do any means testing. So when someone walks through our door, their income level will not dictate what type of interaction they have with us. We treat everybody kind of on a level playing field and have those services out there for families, so there's not a lot of red tape or hoops to jump through.
That's good to know. So it's same access for everyone, no matter what your position in life, because as we also know that Alzheimer's is not discriminatory. It will affect anybody, no matter what your social status, your economic status, your race. It doesn't matter. It's going to affect people, and it is just so devastating that it makes sense for you to have open access for everyone, and that's great. That's really, really great. We have a lot more to talk about, Jessica, but we're going to take our first commercial break, and everyone stay tuned. We'll be back with Jessica McDonald, social worker from the Alvin Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center, in just a moment.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Okay, we are back, and we are live at the Alvin A. Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm speaking with Jessica McDonald. Jessica is the social worker here. She's a licensed clinical social worker and has her master's in social work, and obviously has a lot of experience and knowledge when it comes to helping caregivers with this disease called Alzheimer's. So, Jessica, let's talk a few minutes about some of the more common requests that you receive. I know that you're interacting at least 100 times a month with caregivers. What are some of the most common requests, the ones that you hear the most often?
Well, we often will come across caregivers who have driven here directly from their neurologist's office. So it's not uncommon for families to say something like, "We just left the neurologist's office. My husband or spouse was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and they handed us your card." And so when the families come in, sometimes they seem almost a little shell-shocked. They're not sure where to start, what they're looking at, that sort of thing. So we'll start with a little bit of education at that point, a little bit of information about community resources, and really try to help guide that family. We definitely work diligently to not be too overwhelming to folks and never to be pushy with the services that are out there, but just more to help them understand that we want to work with them as partners and to be that backup for them and that assistance, but not try to make them feel that they're being forced into any sort of decisions or actions or that sort of thing. So that happens quite a bit. A lot of times we'll have families come in here and they're very, very nervous about the possibility that at some point they may have to place their loved one. You know, most people don't want to have to do that, which we understand. You know, that's a big transition for everybody in the family when those types of things do occur. So we'll sit down with the family and talk about, well, how can we have little breaks for the caregiver along the way? How can we support them along the way, allowing them to be that primary caregiver longer? You know, allowing them to keep their loved one within the home longer than if they tried to go at 100% alone. And then there are those situations where the families really are at the point where placement is necessary and maybe the safest bet for all involved. And then we'll talk about local communities here in the area, different memory care units, different options, how to pay for it all, that sort of thing.
Great. That's great. So you mentioned that a lot of times people come directly here straight from the neurologist's office because they've been given that diagnosis of some form of dementia. So I'm curious, when they show up at your doorstep, do they have the patient with them, the person who's been diagnosed? Do they come also?
Many times, yes. Many times, yes. And so we have to be very sensitive when we're handling those interactions because we want everybody to feel heard and validated and supported, but we also don't want to say things in front of the person with a diagnosis that might be upsetting.
Okay.
Especially if the person with a diagnosis maybe doesn't believe that they have dementia. That can be a very delicate situation that we have to really try to work through with the family.
So when someone's been diagnosed newly with Alzheimer's, is it your experience that they are scared or confused or in denial or all of the above?
I think all of the above, really. It's very rare that we have someone who's completely aware of the totality of the situation that they're facing. So many times the person with a diagnosis will say something like, well, I might be a little forgetful, but I don't think it's really bothering me that much, or I don't think it's really impacting my life that much. And then you look at the family caregiver and they're kind of shaking their head because maybe the caregiver has had to do a lot more recently than they had in the past, taking care of all the housework, doing all the finances, all the driving, that sort of thing. And the person with memory issues, it's not so much maybe that they're in denial, but truly unaware of how affected their life has been.
Yeah, I understand that. They are going through their life and maybe they just think they've forgotten a couple things and it's part of aging, but we all know that, things can be lost, for the moment. They'll be on the tip of our tongue, and most times if we think about it, we can remember. But someone that has severe memory loss, getting into dementia, many times that information can never be retrieved, but because they have dementia, they forget about it and life goes on. Isn't that kind of ironic?
It is. It definitely is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, at this point, their primary caregiver, whoever it might be at the time, it could be a spouse or it could be maybe an adult child, they're the ones that really have to be in this game because obviously a person with dementia that's far enough along, they're not able to make their own decisions. They're not able to answer any of the questions that you might ask to ascertain what their needs are regarding their quality of life. So it's very, very important that people do have some type of support with a primary caregiver, but also an extended team. So when you're counseling families, do you talk about having a team approach?
We definitely do. We talk about or try to illustrate with families that the people who are the most successful on this journey are the ones who are open to having that help, that team approach, local neurologists, local maybe home health agencies or paid caregivers. Some folks are very interested in clinical trials, and we have a good research center here in town that will provide their information for as well. We want people to have as many resources as they can to make this a successful journey. The other thing that I want to just circle back to, I agree 100% that the family caregiver is critical at this stage for folks with memory issues. We are recently seeing kind of an uptick in clients who are being referred to us, and unfortunately for those folks, there are no caregivers. So the person either is a widow or widower or divorced or living here alone, whatever situation may have led up to that. They're experiencing some of these memory difficulties, but there isn't that family system to fall back on. And I'll be honest, those cases are much more difficult because without that family caregiver kind of driving the boat, it is hard to get things accomplished.
Yes, and if there's no family involved and no one has already got durable power of attorney for someone or healthcare surrogate where they can make these decisions, it's even harder because then sometimes it falls to the court system to appoint a guardian. I had a lady one time who actually was the caregiver for her high school teacher. So for many years, the teacher and the student stayed in touch over all the years after high school, invitations to the wedding, different things like this. But the teacher had never married, didn't have any children, And the only person in her life that she had any kind of history with was this student from high school. And that's the person who actually became her primary caregiver. And who would have thought, right, that this scenario would have occurred? But the problem is that, the person obviously was not a big social person, didn't have relatives that she could actually reach out to, or who could reach out to her. And so if it wasn't for this student from high school that was kept in touch with the teacher, this teacher would have been in a whole lot of trouble, and things wouldn't have been as smooth as they turned out to be, because the student was able to navigate and help the former teacher through this disease. So I can't stress enough, and I'm sure you too would agree, that it's very, very important for people to think about these things. Even if you're listening to this program and you think you may have some memory problems, you want to find out what's going on, but get a team member, get somebody who can go with you, somebody you trust, somebody that you can rely on and depend on to pick up the pieces when things start falling apart. And what other type of situations, Jessica, would be important for people to know when someone is first diagnosed? Does the topic of driving come up much when people are faced with this devastating diagnosis? What about driving and talking about safety issues?
Driving is one of the hardest conversations that families have to have with their loved ones when they have memory issues. Most, at least in my experience, most of the folks that we've worked with are very reluctant to give up their driving privileges. So often we will work with the families in trying to get the loved one to a place of maybe some acceptance about that. We'll talk about the safety concerns. We have some wonderful experts here in town who can offer comprehensive driving evaluations that we refer to quite frequently. And we really come at it from a safety perspective. And so when we're talking with the person with memory issues, it's important to bring that up, but also to validate how they're feeling, because it does stink that they can no longer drive. People will typically say, well, that's really not fair, especially if they're in the earlier stages. They'll say, well, I've been driving longer than you've been alive. I'm an excellent driver. And so we talk about that all of those things may be very, very true, but we're in a different situation now and have to approach it differently. So we really do try to, offer that education and be that backup for the family caregiver to get some of these things accomplished. The other thing I'll just throw out that I think is very important for families, even in the very beginning stages, is really to start to build that social community of support. One of the worst things or most dangerous things that we see here at the center is when families become isolated. And that can lead to a whole host of issues, from depression, from not having the backup that you need, from, the caregiver passing away sometimes before their loved one. And we find that all of those issues are negatively impacted when a family has become isolated. So we try to really work with families to help them with those connections so they do have a community support, so they understand that they're not in this game alone. There are other people here with them trying to help.
Right, that's very, very important, and I'm sure you see this a lot. There's also the subject of guilt. When you talked earlier about, oh, well, I'm going to have to place my loved one, in a home, that brings on a whole nother set of emotions, and people start feeling guilty. What do caregivers do when they're so guilty they get paralyzed? How do you help them overcome guilt?
One of the ways that we find to be really successful is when caregivers are connected with their peers who have maybe already gone through that part of their journey. They can talk about those feelings of guilt. They can talk about feelings of letting their loved one down with people who really, truly understand that and have already walked that walk. And we talk with the caregivers here individually as well about, a lot of people say, well, I promised so-and-so we'd always be together. I would never place them. And we talk about that promise, and what's really behind that is promising that you're always going to love the person and make sure they're taken care of and make sure that they're safe. And you can still do all of those things, even if they have to live in a residence that's no longer the family home. So we try to help people walk through that process. But it is a true process. People, from the caregiver's perspective, it's a big transition for them alone, or for them as well. And a lot of people have maybe never lived alone before. And the idea of that is quite frightening. And they need that space to really be able to deal with those emotions and process them so they can take those positive next steps in care.
Well, I'm glad that you said the word positive, because when someone has to go into a community like an Alzheimer's assisted living, because for lots of reasons, caregiver's overwhelmed, caregiver can't do it anymore, caregiver ends up sick, caregiver dies, whatever the reason, I think it can be a positive experience, and most times caregivers don't see that where they are, how it can benefit them, and how it can benefit their loved ones. So do you talk about the benefits of going into an assisted living for memory care, and why it could be a good thing?
We definitely do. We talk about how nice it is for people with memory issues to be in environments that are designed for them, that are safe, that they don't get told no so often. When people have memory issues and they're in the family home, there are a lot of safety risks, and that person with memory impairment gets told no a lot, even if it's a perfect, wonderful caregiver. And they do that because they have to keep them safe. Whereas in communities that are designed for their needs, if they want to get up and walk around in the middle of the night, that's okay. If they want to paint at 2 a.m., that's okay. And it helps the family understand that this actually can be a very positive step for your loved one. But also for the family caregiver, it lets them revert somewhat to the role they had before. A lot of people will say, well, I don't feel like the husband anymore. I'm just the caregiver. Well, when you have some people helping you out, you'll still be the caregiver in a different way, but you'll be able to capture a little bit of that husband role back. And that can be a really nice thing to have.
Yeah, you're right. It's a positive thing for both the caregiver and the person with the memory loss in different ways, of course. And I think it all boils down to quality of life and preserving the positive relationship that you once had with that person. And this is one way, obviously, to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good point, too, that this is one of the options. And when we talk with families, we always like to present a few different things, again, because not one thing will work for every single person. And so I think families feel really assured or reassured when they feel like, okay, here are some different options I can try. I'm not pigeonholed into doing one thing over the other.
And that's good. It's always good to have options. So we're going to exercise an option right now to go to commercial break. So stay with us, and we'll be back with more great information from the Alvin Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We're back, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor of this program, Arden Courts. Arden Courts memory care community. They are a leader in memory care. They specialize in dementia of all sorts to help keep the residents safe, happy, and healthy. And there are many Ardent Courts throughout the country, 10 of them right here in Florida. So if you are looking for some support, some help, some resources, definitely look up the closest Ardent Courts near you. Ardent Courts offers to caregivers listening to this program an additional resource. It's called the 36-Hour Day Book. This is a wonderful resource for caregivers. It's written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Nace. It's in its 5th edition, which means that it's always being updated with the latest news on dementia. It has great caregiving tips, definitions, all kinds of things that a caregiver might want to look up and read either from cover to cover or sort through and pick chapters out that might relate to what you're going through at the time. This book is absolutely free just because you're watching or listening to this program. All you have to do is call the toll-free number of Ardent Courts and request the book. That number is 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410. Give them a call. Let them know that you heard about the free 36-hour day book offer on the Caregiver Solutions info show, and they will be glad to get your name and address and make sure that a book is mailed directly to you. So give them a call today, and you'll be glad that you did. So I'm on location today in Fort Myers, Florida, at the Alvin A. Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center in Fort Myers, Florida. And we're talking to some experts here at the Resource Center who are in the trenches with caregivers on a daily basis. Next up to talk with us is Mary Fryer. She's an RN. She's the Health Education Specialist here at the Alvin Alzheimer's Resource Center, Alvin Dubin. And we are glad to have you with us, Mary. Hello.
Hi, Marcia. Thank you so much for having us. As Jessica said, we're just pleased that you've invited us on your show today, so thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us and talking about all things related to Alzheimer's, dementia, and caregiving. So I first want to ask you, what does your title entail? You're the Health Education Specialist. It might be self-explanatory, but I'm sure that it has a lot of facets to it. So explain to me and to the listeners what you do on a daily basis.
Okay, you're right. There are a lot of facets to it, and I absolutely enjoy every bit of it. Number one, I provide state trainings for nursing homes, home health agencies, assisted livings, dementia care units. It's state required, so that's one of the things that we do, or I do. It's a required course that all these facilities have to have, so that's one aspect of it. I also provide training obviously for families, for professionals, whether they're in a doctor's office or it's even over at the school at FGCU. I'm working with the students over there at the occupational therapy program in the master's level, teaching them. Just different, even going out in the community and helping restaurants learn about this, first responders, police officers, the health department, emergency shelters. We've given a program for them, just various community agencies.
Wow, you are busy, lady.
I am.
So tell me, how does it benefit a person or a caregiver caring for someone with Alzheimer's? How does it benefit them to have you out there in the community talking about the disease?
Well, a couple of things. One, it helps for the professionals. I like to teach in person. I know a lot of people are doing things online, which is great and fine. Any information that we can get is fantastic. But I really like to teach in person, whether it's the first responders or students or family members, so that we can engage. Questions can be asked, and we can bounce information off of each other. So, like for instance, if I'm teaching a home health class, home health agency class, what I will do is I will go around and ask the participants, here's a scenario, what are some things you've done in the past, or what are some things you do to handle the situation? And as they share that information, one of the other caregivers in the room may go, well, gosh, I didn't know I could do that, or, oh, I didn't know that would work. And so you're passing information around. You have to really think out of the box when you're talking about it, educating people with about dementia, because dementia has so many different facets itself. A lot of times we'll hear people say, well, the book says this. Well, dementia doesn't go by the book, So you have to be willing to open your mind and your heart and be willing to stand back and realize that these are my patients, or these are my parents or my friends who are going through this, and they're just living life at a different angle. So how can I help? How can I engage them in activities, or how can I help understand maybe they're sad, or what this behavior is meaning today, to help that person have a better quality of life. And once a caregiver can do that, whether professional or family, the caregiver's stress decreases as well, and they become more engaged as well through the process.
That's wonderful. I'm curious about something. As you're going out and teaching on Alzheimer's, memory loss, do you ever encounter people that have some misconceptions about what Alzheimer's is, what it means, things that they are saying, well, I thought it was this, or they get an aha moment after you kind of explained it? Do you have anything to share on that?
Definitely. Sometimes very early on when we are starting to work with caregivers who've had zero education, what they have heard has been just maybe from neighbors or what have you, or other family members, or people from out of town. Let's say you're the caregiver here in Florida, but your sibling is in New York, and your sibling's calling you and say, well, Mom sounds great on the phone. Why is this all happening? So that tends to be an issue. So helping them understand where the challenging behaviors are coming from. And I do this actually showing them pictures of the brain, how Alzheimer's disease or some of these related dementias start to destroy the brain. And it's not that they're doing this on purpose. This is part of the disease process, and that disease process is driving your loved one's behaviors. And when they can actually see what's happening, and also see it from a cellular level, what's changing their loved one, it gives them permission to stand back and go, wow, they're not doing this on purpose. I don't have to yell at them and be all upset and frustrated. I can step back and look at this as a real medical thing. It's just as if somebody has lost their legs and you tell them to stand up. They can't. And they're not trying to deny you or frustrate you by not getting up and walking. They don't have the means. And so we can help them understand that, whether it's, again, a family or a professional caregiver or a first responder or a police officer pulling somebody over, if they can understand a little bit what's going on inside the brain, then it helps that caregiver then become more engaged. And like I said, it helps decrease their stress level.
Yes, definitely. So there is a big push right now for dementia-friendly cities, dementia-friendly countries, where people are finally jumping on board to do this education with everyone in the community to make it easier for caregivers and a little less stressful for all involved. So I'm curious that you go to restaurants to educate them. So tell me what your scenario would be like and what you would teach staff at a restaurant regarding dementia.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. I'm going to back up just a little bit. Through the Dubin Center, we started an initiative back in 2014 called the Dementia Friendly Houses of Worship. And that program started going out to the community and teaching different churches or houses of worship about what dementia is and how they can start bringing somebody who's at home, the caregiver and the person with memory impairment, back into the church or their organization for support and just for a relationship. Then that spread to things like going to restaurants and going to grocery stores and different things like that. What I do when I teach a restaurant or a staff at a restaurant or wherever I'm teaching, I help them understand basically what's going on within that person's brain so that they can understand that this is somebody that's not just being, they're aggressive or they're lost or confused or whatever and they're being difficult. That if that person can just have a little bit of knowledge about that, then they're going to approach the situation differently. Just as if somebody was outside or at a restaurant and somebody came in with a child who was autistic or maybe had severe Downs. We can all see that. you can typically see that. And what will happen is that the person who's the waiter or whoever will calm themselves, and they will work with the caregiver to help that be a great, situation, dining experience, because they can see that, they may have somebody who has a handicap or what have you. You can't see dementia. And so sometimes, like in a restaurant, when you have maybe a waitress or a waiter come up and they're talking very, very fast, there's a lot of music in there, a lot of chatter going on. They're rattling off things off the menu very quickly, and the person with memory impairment is trying to process even where they are and what's going on. So the person with memory impairment then may become a little frustrated or what have you. Then the caregiver starts to get a little frustrated, and the scenario starts to build. And then you have a person, a waitress or waiter, who doesn't understand the scenario. Now they're aggravated, and it just snowballs. Whereas if we can help them understand what's going on, they can treat it totally differently. So they would speak slower, they would speak louder, their body language would be, they would be smiling. They would possibly, the caregiver may say, my loved one has dementia or memory impairment, and where would you like, they may ask them where they would like to see it, or have a seat. They may have a card, like we have a card that says my companion has memory impairment, and they may show that to the waitress, and so that waitress who's had that training now knows how to handle things a little bit differently. Like, for instance, maybe the waitress may see that card and go, ma'am, would you like to go ahead and pay for the check now? Would you like to go ahead and cover the check now, and can I bring you a box before they ever get their meal? So that if
and what would be the benefit of that?
So, well, for some reason, if the person with memory impairment all of a sudden has a hallucination, a delusion, maybe they have a toileting accident, they just get agitated, they get scared, something happens, and they want to get up and leave immediately, that caregiver's not trying to flag the waitress down, try to pay the bill, try to get the food, and get out the door. So wow,
I like that idea. That's a great idea. Pay for it up front. Get a box to go if you have to, because when a person with memory impairment is ready to go, sometimes you just can't reason with them, and they're out the door, and you're worried about the bill or your food. I think that's an excellent, excellent tip, Mary. I'm really glad you shared that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's
how receptive are the waiters and waitresses, the staff? How receptive are they to listening to this education and implementing it, have you found?
They're very receptive, and one of the things that I'm proud to say for the Dubin Center is that we are now part of the DCCI Task Force, which is the Dementia Cure and Care Initiative Task Force that came out of Tallahassee, out of the governor's office in 2015, and we have partnered with many agencies in the community to go out and do specifically this, teach restaurants, teach first responders about this, and we're working on further training down the road, but we're real excited to be a part of that, and they're very, very receptive. One of the main goals I have as a health educator here is to really start teaching our young, and I'm talking, junior high, high school, and college-age kids, because they're our caregivers of tomorrow. Whether they're working or not yet, they need to know what's coming their way. The baby boom generation's coming through, and these are going to be their parents or their grandparents that they're going to be involved in taking care of. And if we don't educate them now, we're doing them a real disservice by not preparing them for the wave that's coming through. So by teaching them, this is what you may see at the grocery store, or at the movie theater, or at the car wash, or at the vet, or wherever, they can start to be prepared how to handle these things, and it'll go a lot smoother for everybody.
That's a great idea. I love that. I love that so much. We're going to take our last commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more to Mary and more tips for caregivers, so stay with us.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We're back, and we are live from the Alvin Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm speaking with Mary Fryer. She's a registered nurse and the health education specialist here at the Resource Center. Mary, I love what you talked about, educating the different community resources out there. Plus, you are also educating normal places that people go, people that want to continue to go, the restaurants, the police officers, the health, all of that. I think that's awesome. Let's talk a little bit more about the church part, though, because I think that one of the things that people like to do is go to church, especially since they've always maybe gone, and if they feel like this is not somewhere that would be dementia-friendly, caregivers might back off from taking them. And to educate the congregation is great, to educate others about just what might happen. But I think what is really, really good is that the person with memory loss is not only getting back some of the social contacts that they had, but I think one of the great things is their long-term memory is going to kick in, because with Alzheimer's, the short-term memory is gone, but the long-term memory is there a lot longer. And someone who attended church their whole life, that's going to be a joy for them, and they're going to really benefit from it. So tell me a little bit more about that program.
Okay, so what I do is I've partnered with several different people in our community, one of them being Dr. Mabel Lopez, who's a neuropsychologist here. And we will go and approach the church. What I do is I approach the deacon board, the board of the church, whoever runs the church. We start at the very top so that we can educate them to understanding that you may think they're snowbirds and they've gone back north, but these folks may actually be sitting at their home feeling like they can't come out and come back to church because there's not it's too overwhelming for the person with memory impairment. The church isn't prepared for that person to come in. So what we do is if the church or the faith-based organization says, hey, we want to be trained on this, what I'll do is I'll go in and do several days of training with their volunteers. We let them have time to pick volunteers. We go in and we screen the volunteers, do background check on them, all that kind of stuff, and then they go through an official training with us. And once that gets up and going, then the faith-based organization decides how they want that to go. Do they want it to be a service? Do they want it to be a special service on its own? Do they want to have the whole congregation educated, which I've done that before, especially in smaller churches. One of the churches, Grace Church in Cape Coral, decided after 6 months, instead of just having a small service for one or two people, they decided to try to make theirs a respite, and they call it a time for grace. They started out with one person. They're up to almost 30 now. And it's just been amazing to see what happens. And they do it at a different time frame as well. They do it from 2 to 4 in the afternoon every other Tuesday of the month. So each faith-based organization, after they get their feet wet for a while, will decide how they want that to go. But what I like to help them understand is that, for instance, let's say you have a caregiver sitting there with their loved one, and the loved one, the pastor starts saying, let's say maybe the Lord's Prayer, just for example, or some prayer, and that triggers a memory in that person. And that person with the memory impairment goes, oh, it's time to go to bed. I need to start getting undressed, because after my prayers we get undressed. And they stand up and start undressing. And embarrassment happens. The stigma kicks in, the whole thing. And I've had people tell me who have actually had this experience, people who are not educated to this say, can you not just stay home? Can you just not keep your loved one home? This is not the place you need to bring them. They're disturbing to the congregation. That does not need to happen. So what I do is I help the congregation or the group understand that if you're going to have a smaller service, you gear it more toward not like a child service, but attention span wise, almost like a children's service. You have pet therapy, music therapy, snacks, treats, and your little hymns or whatever you want to do, and your little sermonette. The flip side of that is that gets that caregiver back into the main congregation, because their loved one who can't stand all the noise and the lights and all the people may be in a smaller setting where they are going through their service. Now the caregiver is now sitting back in the main congregation, back amongst their peers and support, and they can have that full hour of worship that they need, that they may not be able to get at all. That's one example of things that we do. And that also then puts them in a situation where if they're having problems financially or they're having problems with food and eating and things like that, once more people know about that in their service, then they have more support. So that's what we're looking to do.
That's wonderful. I love that idea. I remember a year or so ago I stepped in and helped a friend take care of her mother for a Sunday so my friend could go to church, because she was missing out of her church services because she was staying home with the mom who had dementia, and she really missed it. And I just stepped in and said, go, and she could hardly believe that I would do that. And I think that this idea is great because it involves not only the person with dementia, but the caregiver, where they both can get their needs met in a similar environment. So I applaud you for doing this and helping places of work to initiate all of these wonderful programs that you have. If someone, Mary, is listening in the Fort Myers area and they would like to contact you or Jessica, how can they do that?
Okay, you can reach us a couple of ways. Our phone number is 239-437-3007. And that's probably the easiest way to do that. And if you can't remember that, that's okay. Just dial 211, which is the United Way, and just say, hey, I need to talk to those people who help with Alzheimer's disease. They'll put you straight into touch with us.
Because they know who you are.
That's right. That's right.
Because you've been out there educating everybody, and you all are a wonderful resource in the Fort Myers area. I know you have a wonderful reputation. I've heard so many good things about all the great services that you provide, and one of those is also support groups. You have support groups that also are facilitated through the Resource Center, correct?
We do. We have just a couple. We have 21.
Oh, man.
Yes, we have 21 support groups that are phenomenal social workers. Jessica and Irene run, starting from right here at our own office off of Brantley Road in Fort Myers, down all the way to Bonita, into Sanibel, up to LaBelle, North Fort Myers, Cape Coral. We're all over the place, and they just do a great job. The support groups have been amazing. I, on occasion, have gotten to participate when one of the social workers had to be off or something, and it's just amazing. The camaraderie and the support and the friendships that get built. We've even had marriages come out of it. So it's been just really amazing to see these folks. And I tell our caregivers that they're a wealth of knowledge. When you've walked this road personally, you learn things that you never thought you could learn about yourself and about your loved one and about this disease process. And anything that you have to share in these support groups with each other is so important. It doesn't matter whether you're in the beginning stages or the end stages. We all have something to share. It's super important.
Well, thank you, Mary, so much. I'm afraid our time is up. So thank you to the Alvin Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center, to Jessica McDonald and Mary Pryor. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget, call, get your free book, The 36-Hour Day, 888-478-2410. I'm afraid our time is up today, but we'll be back next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, give someone a hug because they need it and so do you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on CareGiverSolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.